about frauds and hoaxes. You could probably lump in the ideas of false flags and such into that particular pile. I was laughing to myself walking over here to a favorite sitting spot to sit and talk a bit. Frauds and hoaxes sounded something like a modern pub name, like Frogs and Horses or something, but we're most certainly not talking about frogs and horses. Bit of levity never hurts when talking about these subjects because everything's so serious. But when it comes to frauds and hoaxes, well, let's define it quickly. What's a hoax? It is deception by trickery. Much of our modern social narrative is unfortunately based entirely on hoaxes. Trickery at the highest levels and perpetrated and produced by those with the highest levels of access and funding and resources with which to create these events that help shape a cultural narrative, that help steer a civilization or a state or a community even into a certain paradigm, a certain direction, a certain story that they then integrate into their own life story and perpetuate down and down through the generations. And what's a fraud? Same idea, except the intent, and it's more of a legal term, I think, because it is deception and trickery for the sake of causing injury to another. And injury, of course, is where the legal idea comes in, lawful ideas come in. And when you injure someone, you are, of course, liable for legal proceedings against you, should they be able to prove it or decide to sue, etc., etc. But in the real lived sense, we all are living through some variations of frauds, again, as an element of the hoax and deception by trickery idea. It does relate a little bit to the trickster idea I've spoken about previously. How could it not? It's right in the definition. Deception by trickery. So is it simply for us to have something to test our boundaries, test our beliefs, test our paradigms against? Something that pokes and prods at our peaceful existence and our harmonious ideals and our highest aspirations to keep us on our toes, as it were? Is it simply just another version of that yin-yang sort of energetic expression in this realm? Is that positive versus negative, that good versus evil, that light versus dark? Is that all that's at play here, or is it something else? Well, I mean, you can define that for yourself. And how does it feel in you, in your body? And how does it play out in your life? How do these frauds and hoaxes, if you're even aware of them, and that's what I'm going to get at in this particular chat, if you're aware or have learned about or looked into these things or become aware of the truth of certain events and ideas, frauds and hoaxes that have been exposed for what they are, how does that affect your story? How does that impugn your identity? How does it shatter your illusions and shake your world, shake your foundation? How does that threaten to destabilize everything that you've lived for or prioritized and valued in your life? How does it play into your story? How does it affect you and those you care about, if at all? Now, I don't need to list off the obvious frauds and hoaxes of the past century, but I will make note of two significant ones that have happened in my generation, those being of the events of September 2001 and the events that were initiated and culminated into the event that happened March 2020 and then lasted for 2, 3, 4 years and still has lasting effects throughout civilization. These were significant inflection points in our social story, and you could not avoid being affected by them in some way, shape, or form, regardless of how far you might live from civilization. And perhaps the luckiest ones would be those who would be completely dissociated and disconnected, living off the land, and perhaps have never heard of either of these particular events. And that would be quite something, quite an accomplishment, an achievement. And I would doubt that there are more than a handful of people across the whole realm that survived these things unscathed. But regardless, for the rest of us, for those that were unfortunately and perhaps deeply and traumatically affected by these things, we've had to contend and reconcile with all of the after effects and the downstream knock-on machinations that have been introduced through the system, laws and policies and things that have been artificially pushed forward and made prominent due to these false, fraudulent, and hoax events. And we have to now integrate them or say, nope, no thank you. I don't accept that offer. I don't accept that contract. And thank you and good day. I'm going to live my life without your bullshit. I was listening a little bit to a podcast, which I will link below, with the guest being Ole Dammegard, or Dammegard, which I've learned now is a mispronunciation of his name, which makes sense. There is an accent above the A in his last name, so it's Dammegard. Regardless, he's a conspiracy researcher, if you want to call him that, a truth seeker of sorts, and he's been doing it for, 44 years. So he's well versed in these things and deeply researched, and he's produced numerous books, documentaries, etc., etc. He has been, threatened with all sorts of repercussions, of course, up to and including death threats in his life for the things that he's exposed or people that he's, shone the light on that were doing evil and dastardly and disgusting things, people directly involved in some of these frauds and hoaxes that we're talking about. That's been his life's work. Like a lot of us in this particular field, I guess if you could call it, we have this natural inclination toward discerning and sharing what we find to be true when we look into these things. When we feel into something that is obviously wrong, something that is off, we are motivated to dig into it a little bit. We're motivated to seek out what's real and true about that particular story. And some of us, like Ole, certainly go a heck of a lot more in depth, and they dig and dig and dig and dig until they're satisfied, and maybe they're never fully satisfied that they found what is actually real and true about something, and then they share it. And not that they're trying to convince people, they're just offering and sharing information. And the whole point, of course, is that the underlying motivation, the foundational reasonings for the work that he does, what motivates him is to get to what's true, but to understand the principle of being able to improve our skills at discernment and detecting, honing that bullshit radar, and to be a little more adept and skilled and capable at seeing through these narratives and these frauds and hoaxes that are coming at us and constantly imposing upon us ideas and stories and narratives that they want us to believe and to integrate into our lives, and that they want to reshape our perception of reality and how this world works and what is not real and true about our reality. So that's the principles idea again. People like Ole and myself and many, many, many others are always trying to put forth better information, clearer information, ideas, resources, and such to help people reframe things, rebuild a foundation on something that's real, and to dispel and destroy illusions that they may have been living with and through, and to just cast aside the nonsense narratives that are doing them harm, usually because they're not aware of it. And the awareness and being able to name something again is the only way to dispel it. I see you, go away. You've served your purpose. I don't need you anymore. See you later. At the same time, consider the source. While Ole is certainly well-versed and deeply researched on all these things, he admits that both of his parents, and he only found out after the fact, I think, both of them were involved in, leading double lives and working for the intelligence community and working for the military-industrial complex over in Europe, and responsible for some dastardly deeds themselves. So who really knows who this guy is and what his motivations are? On the surface of it, yes, he's providing an awful lot of truth. He's one of those very vocal and very well-informed conspiracy theorists, truthers, but he's still human and he's still fallible, just like the rest of us. So it is upon us, as usual, to discern whether or not these things ring true, and to not simply take things as authentic and real on the face of it. But we can generally trust our intuition on these things, right? And that's the idea. We can trust our bullshit radar, as I was saying. We can trust that something within, that heart-centered awareness that can never be corrupted and co-opted, right? They can mess with us up here forever and a day because mind control is extremely effective and profitable in this realm. And those powers that be know very well how to pull those strings, push those buttons to get us to do all sorts of crazy psychopathic things, the infighting and the never-ending wars and the conflicts and such based on faiths and religions and beliefs and paradigms. They're very easily weaponized against us because of our inherent emotional, passionate, caring, compassionate, empathetic nature. The natural human being is caring, conscientious, loving, protective, right? And it's only through distortions, delusions, programming, and grooming and complete dissociation with that which is real and natural about us that we fall into these traps. And that's why there's so many layers and so many impositions and so many schemes and plans and agendas at play at all times, at every level of our society, in every institution, right? In every integral structure of societal framework, there's some element of that distortion and corruption and co-opting by these parasitic and predatory forces. So again, it's upon us to hone the skills to detect these frauds and hoaxes and not presume everything is fake and a lie, but it's not a bad place to start in general, especially in the modern era. Now that we're adopting and integrating technology into all parts of our lives and people are buying into the nonsense of smart tech and the Internet of Things, and we are the things, right? The more we integrate this tech, the more we're wearing it on our wrists or putting it in our heads and wearing it on our bodies, thinking that that's some sort of progress or advancement or hack or some sort of efficiency thing. It's complete nonsense. So if you're buying into that, you're a moron and you need to shake yourself awake a little bit. You're not helping yourself. You're not improving things. You're not streamlining or making more efficient anything. You're not improving any sort of safety or security. You're simply playing into the script, right? You're giving them all of your information, resources, and energies, creative and otherwise, for free, willingly. So you need to wake up to that and stop doing it. And these big events, as the few I mentioned, they're quite easy to immediately on the face of it see that there's something absolutely wrong and deceptive about it, and that there's absolutely trickery involved. What's difficult is to disseminate that truth and to point it out to those who have been in general, traumatized, freaked out, or terrified into believing something and, seeing the video clips and ideas playing over and over and over from different angles. And then, the pundits and experts and the liars and deceivers that come onto the screens to put forth their, opinions, and which are also another element of the same fraud and hoax and trickery. It's just ingredients to the same cake that they're forcing down our throats. And the trouble is, once you do dig into some of these big events, you can then go back and back and back and start to unravel the fabric of reality going back decades, generations, and even centuries. And you start to see that this is happening all the time. Some of the most impactful and significant events of our history are entirely fraudulent and hoaxes. And that's difficult to contend with, difficult to reconcile, given the passion which with certain remembrances and rituals happen yearly to make sure that, lest we forget, that they don't let us forget, and they don't let us to forget their narrative, their version of history that has been challenged, debunked, and proven to be fraudulent and completely fiction. Yes, many people died, and a lot of people were sent to their death, but not for the reasons you think, right? And this goes on and on and on and on. So we weren't there. We can't really prove things for ourselves. We can rely on certain historicities and looking into certain resources, documentaries, books and such. But again, who's got the time to delve deeply into these things? So we try and find the resources and those that are deeply researched, such as Ole and others like himself, people that have been digging into these things And you won't likely find, obviously, in the mainstream, because they are shunned and censored and ostracized from that discussion altogether. So, if you're keen to learn true things, you can't go the mainstream route. You can't believe anything that's offered through academia and these Wikipedia type information sources, which basically, some would argue that most AI services now are essentially, variations on the Wikipedia theme. They're putting forth ideas that are simply already accepted, established in the narrative. And unless you're educated and researched a little bit outside of that paradigm, you're just going to accept everything that instantly comes down through these sources when you ask the questions, when you get into these discussions. And that's something I try to explore in my own chats with ChatGPT, and take it for what it is. It's not a final answer on anything. It's just another way to try and approach that particular kind of discourse and debate. And I'm certainly not researched or studied enough to be able to pick apart all the answers it provides, but I do catch it occasionally on things that I have looked into, and other times it's a matter of feeling. When things are coming at you quickly and instantly, and with how our attention spans happen today, we don't really take the time to pause and reflect on anything. It's just instant go, scroll, swipe. We don't take more than a few seconds and split seconds to move on to the next thing. So we don't give our minds, our hearts, our ideas, our energy, our presence a moment's pause to take a breath and to downregulate, because we're going to react, we're going to move on, we're going to share something without really thinking about what we're doing. So I would urge you to flip that narrative, to change that behavior, to retake that attention stealing sort of practice and slow down. Don't just keep swiping and scrolling just because you're distracted or need the dopamine hits or whatever it might be that you've trained yourself into and been conditioned into doing, because it's so accessible and there's just too much information, too many cool things, too many funny cat videos that you just got to keep on keeping on. Slow down and give yourself some perspective. Slow down and give your heart a chance to feel into something, especially if it's an important thing, especially if it's some sort of social engineering thing that may not on the face of it seem that way, but if you really pause and really take a look and really take a breath, you'll realize, oh, okay, that's a fraud, or that's a hoax. I don't know why, but it sure feels like a hoax. Let's look into that a bit. If it affects your family, your friends, your community, if it affects your identity, if it challenges you and makes you react in some way, look into it a bit. Do yourself a favor, dig into a little bit, and who knows where that might lead you. That might help you change your whole trajectory in life. It might help you realign with something that's a little deeper, something that's a little more authentic, something that's a little more true for you, because you've just gotten off the train of reactivity and scrolling and swiping and social media, this, that, and the other thing, which, allows you to pull back from the manufactured crises and the frauds and the hoaxes that are everywhere for the eyes to see, and for their machine algorithms and such to steal your gaze, which steals your spirit, which steals your focus and your ability to concentrate and your ability to comprehend anything, because you're only ever touching things surface level. Take a pause, take a breath, and go a little deeper, or just stop altogether and sit in silence for a while and see if something else comes up, that some other question, some other ideas, something else that it touches on that reminds you of, that has never quite felt right.
Running fast through the fire and stone.
The whole fraud and hoax thing is insidious, because while there are certainly these, tentpole things, these massive events that shake the world, that shake our lives, and they're all frauds and hoaxes, there's an innumerable amount of smaller events that are consistently happening, even in your own backyard, and at every level of society. So it's not something that's just these big things, these big turning points, these big false flags, frauds and hoaxes that are happening. There's a lot of little things in between that agitate and annoy and frustrate and confuse us. So it's that energy that's persistent throughout the whole social narrative, throughout certain elements of society, especially in the big things that they seem to make into big things, such as government, economy, geopolitics, climate, war, gender, virology, vaccines, All these things that are most often based on complete fraud, fraudulent science, complete hoax events, as I was saying earlier. But there's different levels, right? And you're being affected by these things usually quite on an unconscious level. So become conscious of it so that you can dispel its effect on you, so that you can just cancel it and remove it from your existence. And once you're aware of it, you don't have to associate with it anymore. You don't have to allow it into your field. You don't have to allow it any sort of presence of mind whatsoever. You don't have to allow it any sort of interruption, imposition. It's just like invasive thoughts, right? We can catch it. So there's that thought about blah, 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 blah. I see you. Poof, it's gone. You dispel its energy, right? So when we want to counter these narratives from within ourselves, to develop these muscles of discernment and understanding truth and seeing through the lies, illusions, frauds, and hoaxes, it's like anything else. We have to take the time to sit with it, to look past the headlines, to look past the noise, the flashy emergency broadcasts, the inflammatory sort of debates that are misleading, misinforming, and disinforming people, because we rely on that authority that's coming at us through the screen, that's coming at us from the outside, instead of summoning what is true and what is actually real about it from within, from the heart center, from our natural inborn skills to be able to discern what is fact from fiction, what is real from the false and the fraudulent, and what is very likely a hoax. It will certainly surprise you. It will probably disappoint you. It will probably infuriate you, and it could even terrify you if you do look into these things to any degree. But it's not necessary. There's enough to deal with in your day-to-day. There are far more important things to contend with and to put our energies toward and to do, and there's far better ways to use your creative powers and your short time in this life. So don't let it steal your gaze. First of all, when you're staring and reacting and emotionally involved in something, stop the momentum before it gets too far in. And very likely the worse and more traumatic and enormous the event seems, the more likely it is entirely a hoax or a fraud. It's not to just cancel and throw away everything that's offered. It's not to minimize the struggling, suffering, pain, and extreme sort of situations that people are going through. I appreciate that. But it's important for us to reclaim that scaffolding, that framework, that foundation upon which we build our concept of reality, that's constantly under threat, that's constantly being stolen and sucked away from us and pushing us into ideas of victimhood, vaulting others into the idea of martyrdom and heroism and all these false things that keep us divided, polarized within and without, that keep us infighting and arguing and debating about non-issues, that keep us fighting and putting a lot of negative energies into things that were completely made up, that were completely false to begin with. The unfortunate thing is, we could realize many years after the fact that we were misled about something, and then we'll feel guilty or ashamed or frustrated or infuriated because we were so easily taken by the story, and we so easily bought into the lie, and we were so gullible, and on and on and on, right? It's a downward spiral way of thinking. So don't worry about those things. Admit you were wrong about something, admit that you were misled, admit that they lied, and dispel that energy. It's okay. You're here now. You're still alive. You're still functioning. You're just a little more aware now. You're just a little more educated. You're a little more resilient. You're a little more discerning. You're a little wiser. You will heal from it. You will strengthen those muscles. You will rise again in the morning and be ready for the next thing, the next day. And you will realize and understand that much of what is presented from out there in this modern era, perhaps since time immemorial, is fraudulent. It's a hoax. The better you get at discerning and dispelling those false notions, those false narratives, those false ideas that want to just eat up everything they can that you're going to give and just hand away for free, the more energy and creative impulse and spark and focus and passion and joy you will have for your own things. and for building a stronger framework for you and those you care about with which to get the most out of this one short human life. So not everything is a fraud or a hoax, but most of those things are. Take it for what it is. Don't believe anything I say. Dig into it for yourself. See how it feels. See what comes up. So how do we do it? How do we, those of us who aren't going to be looking into conspiracies, those of us who aren't truthers, or whatever term you want to use, those of us who aren't the shit disturbers and questioning everything and seeing everything as a hoax or a fraud on the face of it before accepting any story put to us from the public narrative, from the mainstream, from the usual sources. How do we discern the rest of us? How do we learn to understand these things? How do we improve these skills and develop these muscles of discernment and this sense when something is off, to just set it aside, to dispel it, to not be so affected by it in a negative or traumatic way? How do we go about this? Well, one way is to listen to, an interview such as the one with Mr. Dammegard that I'm going to share. Take it with a grain of salt. He goes on to some different rants and things because, again, he's been doing this for years. He's done thousands of interviews, I'm sure, and he's been talking about these things for over 40 years. That's a lot. He's well versed in these topics. So there's nuggets, there are gems all throughout that you can pick up and learn from. Listen to the interviews of him and others. If he doesn't resonate with you, there are others. Even on that one podcast, the Fair Food Forger, something like that. I can't remember if that's the exact name. Look elsewhere. You won't likely find them on YouTube. You'll have to go to Rumble or Odyssey probably. Check out my Substack. There's some recommendations there for other people that are in this line of thinking, like-minded folks who are digging up the truth and such in different fields and things that are likely of interest to you. It's because it'll affect your health, your money, your business, your family, your life, your state, your nation, your politics. Point is that if you are intent on learning what is real and true, if it is your actual intent to be able to discern better, you're ahead of 99% of the crowd. Making that decision in itself shifts momentum, shifts your perspective, alters your perception of reality simply because you've decided, you've chosen to reorient yourself, to reconfigure your sense making, to reconfigure your epistemology about the reality that you are subjected to every day, that you are immersed in, that you are swimming in, that you are experiencing in this human life of yours. Deciding initiates and defines perhaps a certain kind of momentum, and it will define the path. It will manifest opportunities. It will create opportunities and ideas and avenues with which you can learn to develop these skills. And it's not going to require, a full-time effort. It's not going to require a full-time commitment because you probably don't have the time, which is why you haven't done it thus far. But as with many people who just kind of open that door, it's going to be tempting to go down these rabbit holes. It's going to be tempting to look at everything from a cynical, speculative point of view. And that's fine. That's only natural. Once you start digging into some of these things, you're going to want to reaffirm a whole lot of ideas, to challenge a whole lot of perceptions and perspectives and paradigms that you've had and perhaps been living with. Once you find perhaps that you've been made a fool of and that you've been marvelously ignorant about certain things, that's fine. But again, catch yourself before delving too deeply into it, because it is a never-ending story. There is no end to rabbit holes. There's no end to these frauds and hoaxes because, as I was saying, it's happening all the time. It happens to varying degree across all of society, across all of civilization. It's an element of our reality. It is part of the stock and trade of this reality creation mechanism that we're part of. It's just that most people aren't aware of it, and so they're giving away that autonomy, authority, that agency, as I speak about frequently. They're unconsciously giving these things away, and the more often, the more frequent, the more practiced you are at being unconscious about these things and unaware and simply deferring to somebody else because they said so, because you've been conditioned to your whole life to seek authority, to seek experts, to seek, the doctor, to seek the political leader, to seek whatever, any professional in any field whatsoever, to seek those who have been better indoctrinated than you. It's not an overnight thing. It's not, it's not something you're going to suddenly throw away. If it's really hardwired into who you are, if it's really hardwired into your identity. So be patient. Be considerate, especially with yourself. Be open to just letting go all of it, because you might have to build anew from the ground up. Don't be too harsh with yourself or others who you may believe have been misleading you your whole life, others who are, kind of dumb, daft, and stupid and believing all these frauds and hoaxes. Judgmental attitude and cynicism and outright skepticism is healthy to a degree, but it can be overwhelming and depressing and suck all the wind out of your sails. So don't go too far with it. Don't take any of these things too seriously. You're not here for a very long time. So use them as tools. Use this information as a way to reconfigure, to reframe, reset yourself about certain things, about certain perspectives, about certain understandings about this reality. That's enough. Get to that point where I spoke about in the video. You've done enough. You'll find that point. The sooner the better, because then you can just get on with living. You can get on with understanding the fact that, cool, most of it's bullshit, but some of it isn't. Some of it's real. I'm real. I'm authentic. I'm living my best, most genuine, authentic, real, and true life. Come what may. That's enough. Have a good one.
It's been coming down every other day, but they tell me we are in drought season. That's not my story, not my reality. No matter what you force my eyes to see, and the sky is falling right on top of me, but they tell me it's for the greater good.